I'm not a developer. I spent the last 5 years building customer teams at B2B SaaS companies, and yet now I have more than 10,000 lines of committed code on GitHub. Now, if you're running around on LinkedIn and thinking there's all these people going crazy about AI and I don't even know where to start, then this video is for you. You're gonna be able to do two things at the end of this video. One, you're gonna know how to identify the tasks in your daily work where you can start using AI. And two, you're gonna have the building blocks and how to actually get started. We're also gonna look at one specific example of a weekly task from a sales team, which used to take hours, and I'm gonna show you how to compress it into less than 20 minutes. Enjoy!
This is Melanie.
And this is Christian.
You're listening to Follow the Gradient, the weekly podcast with actionable insights about how to build a business while staying sane.
So the first problem that so many of us now have is we're seeing all these posts on LinkedIn about, hey, I built this Claude Code skill library, common skill, and I'm gonna send it to you. And we think, okay, even if I have commented somewhere now, I get that stuff, I read that stuff, and I still don't know what that means for me or where to start. So I'm gonna show you some really specific examples today on where in your go-to-market function or in your customer unit you can use AI. But obviously you wanna be able to identify on your own when you go through daily life, hey, this could be something where I can actually make it useful. So we're gonna look at a mental model first, which I use in order to identify these workflows and which I hope is helpful to you to kind of get started somewhere. So what we have to think about AI is really powerful at three different things. It's powerful at research, it's powerful at repurposing content, and it's powerful at coding deterministic workflows. And I'm going to come to that in a second on what I mean with that. So when we talk about research, it could be, for instance, have anything to do with lead scoring, right? And this is the example we're actually going to look at, that we're going to research accounts and we're going to benchmark them against our ICP and look at how do these accounts fit. And this could also be obviously research things like competitor scans, lead discovery, account intelligence, right? I want to understand certain signals, events, dynamics, information about people working at an account. All this is research, or it could be a simple market sizing. In terms of repurposing content, what this is all about is really to kind of say, hey, I have a raw input, which is text-based. This could be, for instance, a transcript from a customer call or a feature spec. And I want to use that raw input to produce something else. So for instance, I have notes from a feature release and I do want to write a blog post about it, which I have on my website, or a LinkedIn post on my socials, or an internal description for my customer success team. So one thing we're going to look at today as well is writing a blog post based on a customer call transcript. So here we have all these different examples that we have things like the customer call or a feature spec. And this is kind of the raw input. And I produce something else based on it. This is where AI is super strong for. And this is what we have so many times in, for instance, content marketing or product marketing, and also product in general. Now, coding deterministic workflows. What I basically mean with that is, obviously, as we all know, AI is super strong at producing software code. And a lot of our daily tasks, which we do, like, for instance, doing an analysis based on an Excel list, which always follows the same rules, or copying something from A to B, or shifting a folder from one place to another, or a file, renaming a file, all these different things. We do that a lot of times on a daily basis. And they follow certain rules. And we used to live in a world that people try to do that with Zapier or something, and then everyone moved to N8N. Now, the thing is, what this actually is it follows a certain pattern, which you can capture with software code. And Zapier and N8N were nothing else than making coding a little bit easier for the non-techies like us who don't know how to code. AI makes this redundant because all of a sudden we can code on our own and we can write all these little automations in our daily life which follow these rules. Now, this is really where daily workflows come in a customer unit where you work. This could be, for instance, running a pipeline review, fetching performance analytics from your socials every day or every week and looking at them for certain patterns. Or, for instance, creating an order form in sales for your client, where you have certain input parameters and you capture that somewhere and you want to have a certain Word document or PDF or something and want to send it to that customer. Always the same rule, right? So this is where this comes in. Now, this is really the baseline for so many things where you can identify how to use AI. And it always comes back to these three things when we talk about using AI in a customer unit. Okay, so let's look at how this looks like in practice. So we did say we want to do lead scoring, right? Lead scoring should be possible. It involves a lot of account research and it involves kind of benchmarking the accounts towards certain criteria. So what do we need to do? We need to obviously understand on who we are as a company. And I've made up a company here, but it's not really so important on who we are as a company, but it's more important on who our ICP is. So I've defined an ideal customer profile and I've written that down here. We basically are a company who wants to sell towards companies which are in certain countries within Europe and have between 100 and 1,500 FTEs. A couple of other criteria should apply. And the persona we sell into is primarily the head of sustainability. So we obviously do need a list of accounts, right? We need to get that from somewhere. That list of accounts, probably sales intelligence tool like Apollo. And we then need to apply this ICP against this account list in order to get a list of scored accounts. And we need to break down the ICP into scoring criteria. Sorry, we have here these scoring criteria which we need to apply. And we will arrive then at a list of scored accounts. So this is what we need to do conceptually, right? So to get started, we need a couple of things. And same as this mental model here, these couple of things really apply to almost most of the stuff you're going to do with AI in your customer unit. So obviously we need AI. So we're going to use Claude Code in that session. And I do have that open here. It's open in my terminal, super easy to download. Just go ahead and do it. Open that in your terminal and point it towards a folder. So we do need AI. And Claude Code here is going to function as our LLM. Okay, technically Claude Code is an application which then has access to an LLM, but we're just going to refer to that as an LLM. Secondly, as you heard me say, I need to point Claude Code somewhere. And obviously, we work in organizations with a folder structure like a SharePoint or your G Drive, where you're going to have your information organized. And we're just going to use the same stuff when we work with AI as well. The folder structure, same as for us humans, functions for the AI as kind of an operating structure. It allows us it allows the AI to make sense of things. What we also need is skills. And this is now this thing which I mentioned earlier, which sounds so complicated, but which is really super easy, because what skills are about is we obviously, when we want to do the scoring, right, we need to apply these scoring criteria towards that account list, which is nothing else that then we need to give instructions to the LLM on how to look at this account list, how to do research, how to basically filter these accounts in order to get at our list of scored accounts. So these scoring criteria will be our skills, and these skills are nothing else than instructions for an LLM. Also, super easy. Anyone can do this. no magic, nothing special. And what we also might have to use, we don't know yet, but it does come up a lot of times, are some capabilities or automations on a technical level, for instance, transforming a file, searching for certain information in a file, doing data transformations. So this could be anything from like automations or certain capabilities which we want to deploy. And I'm referring to this simply as scripts, and it does come up. Okay, so back to our scoring. We need to have these things in place to do the scoring, and we need to use these fundamentals. So we do have our LLM. I have it here. And we do have now our folder structure. Just as in any other company, I have now here a folder, lead scoring. Let's imagine that sits within your SharePoint, within a sales folder or a business development folder. And we're going to use that to exchange all this information. We're going to put our account list in there and all that other stuff. So we have the LLM, we have the folder structure. The first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the LLM understands what we're trying to do and what we're trying to pull off. It doesn't have any context, right? So we're going to work in that folder, lead scoring. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, look, get an understanding of the folder. Why I'm doing that is because all the information which I have about who we are, how we work, and what we're trying to pull off, I'm going to save that in that folder. I'm going to operate within that lead scoring folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and going to make sure that the LLM is up to date. And I'm just going to go to auto mode here to not always have to give permissions for the LLM to do something. So we have now the LLM running. We are operating within a folder structure. What we now need to do is we need to make sure that in that folder structure is our account list and that we have our skills in there, which are the scoring criteria, and we have information about our ICP in there. So let's go to that folder structure. In that folder structure, I've just created a folder called raw data, and I've pulled accounts from a sales intelligence tool, where I used Apollo. I'm sure you know it. And Apollo has just given me a data dump in a CSV file. So to make things easy, I've just pulled these 5 accounts, and we're going to open that here in the Google Sheets. I can see a couple of information of the accounts here, just random companies from different countries. In Europe, we see the website, the LinkedIn URL, the name, some technology, short description. So pretty standard, right? So we have that here in the folder. What we also need is, as we said here, we need information on our ICP. So I have these information on the ICP. And what I've done is I've basically saved these information here in the folder in a separate document, which I've called ICP. And it's just a random Markdown document. Markdown is just like a text file, and it contains nothing else than the ICP. Pretty simple, single source of truth for who Verdia sells to. Verdia is the name of our company we made up. Claude reads this before any scoring run. Disqualifiers are hard. So we have that knowledge here in the folder. Just as you would have already somewhere in a PowerPoint or an Excel or in a Word document, your information on who your ICP is. And now we also need the scoring criteria. And remember, that was one of our skills, right? I have that here in a folder as well. And I've basically created another document with scoring criteria where we really break down this ICP and say, look, we need companies of a certain size in terms of FTE. We are targeting a certain geography. We prefer certain countries. We are looking for certain information in terms of regulatory environments these companies are navigating. So all this needs to surface in the research, and we're then gonna apply these scoring criteria in order to make sense on to what degree does that account fit to us or not. That means we have now, in terms of the stuff we need, account list, ICP, scoring criteria, we have that in place. And we know that this corresponds to our fundamentals, which is the folder structure and the skills, some basic information. And let's check our LLM. We had asked our LLM to get an understanding of the folder, and Claude is done. So Claude has worked through the folder and is basically now explaining us what the folder is. We're not going to read this because we already know how our folder works, obviously. So we have everything in place. Claude is pointed to the folder. Claude has a context on what the folder is about. And we know in the folder are key information, which anyone who wants to do a scoring, a human or Claude, needs to have in order to work. Now, let's just pause here, because how does that work, that Claude understands all these information? Because this is really key in order to get to a point that you can work really efficiently with the LLM. This folder just lives in your SharePoint, right? And you have your SharePoint obviously in place as well with all sorts of information. What you have to do is to get your SharePoint to a place that it's optimized for the LLM and not for humans, right? One really big take in getting your organization ready and getting yourself ready is to think about, how do I leverage my LLM first, and not think about how do I work as a human, because we are just gonna interact with the LLM, which we're gonna do now in a second, and we need to make sure the LLM works efficiently in our SharePoint. One thing which you will always end up with, and which you will see so often, is that on the top folder level, somewhere where you navigate, you're gonna find two files, which is either called agentmd, we have it called here claudemd, or indexmd. Now, these files do nothing else than giving upfront information, which Claude is jumping to in order to get a very quick view on what is going on in that folder. So the index file is nothing else, again, kind of a library on what do we have in this folder and why. And Claude here is nothing else than identification on what we're trying to achieve. And this folder has the purpose of doing lead scoring, right? So obviously here in that Claude file, we say, well, Claude, read this before doing anything. And then we're giving it a purpose. You are scoring leads for Verdia, a Zurich-based SaaS company, and so on and so on. So how do I create this? Well, you know the answer, with the LLM, right? I've pointed in preparation of this session the LLM to that folder and basically said, make sure this folder is fully optimized for you. So in the next session, when I point you towards it, you can directly start working with it. And you can do this today with your SharePoint folders as well. Point the LLM towards it, let it get an understanding, and then say, look, this is clearly optimized for humans. Optimize it for you. But now, back to the basics, or back to the real world, let's start. Account list, scoring criteria, we need to get the scored accounts. Claude does have an understanding of our folder now. So what do we want to do? We want to score the accounts. So let's start. There is an account list in there. We need to score these accounts. And excuse my writing here. It doesn't really matter that I do some mistakes. Claude will understand. We need to score these accounts. Please go ahead and do so. Apply any scoring criteria captured in the folder and save the output in lead lists. This is the folder where we basically want to have our output. Take your time. So we're now going to go ahead. And why am I saying take your time? Because I don't want Claude to rush it or to jump or to be jumpy. Sometimes happens. So always a good thing to tell it to take its time. Now, Claude is starting now. Claude is defining tasks for its own. It's starting to research the different accounts. So these are the 5 accounts which we just saw in the CSV file. It's starting the research and it's basically telling us, okay, hey, I'll run web searches for the 5 companies in parallel where possible. So let's see how this works out. We're now 47 seconds into the work. Okay, so now we are 3 minutes, 12 seconds into the task. We can see here that Claude has finished the research and it's now added another task, score and write outputs, which sounds good. So we're basically in the phase here. Let's see. Okay, so we are now 4 minutes in. And Claude is telling us phase 1 is completed. There's 2 files which were created in the folder lead list where we wanted them to. One CSV, one markdown file containing the same information. Now it's giving us already an overview over the score. So we have our 5 companies. 2 of the companies look pretty good, scored 7 and 9. So the others are gonna drop. It's making us aware of some data drifts between the data we had from Apollo and the data which surfaced in its own research. Okay, interesting. Now, the next thing obviously would be it's suggesting us that we can bring this into a styled Excel. So instead of this weird CSV, but okay, fine. More interestingly, obviously, we do want to do a deep dive on these 2 accounts because we obviously want to reach out to them. We will have to get specific leads to reach out to. So we need more information. So it's suggesting us to deep dive into these 2 and move ahead. So yeah, go ahead and continue with the deep dive on both accounts. Let's do that. Okay, so we've moved forward a bit. It took another 3 minutes and 14 seconds. So Claude did now the deep dive research on both of these companies. The fit changed actually slightly for the second one. It's now telling us, okay, I did not write into the MD because this is the pre-deep dive triage record. So we just want to make sure that the CSV updated, make sure the CSV is updated and correct, because then we want to look at it. Now, interestingly, for the second company, the scoring seems to have changed. So let's just look what happens. It should be quick. Let's go into the lead lists. And we do see the 2 files here. There is a scored CSV and a scored markdown file containing the same information. We just want to have the CSV. Looks pretty good. There are some scores. So we had it working for another minute. It confirmed CSV is updated. So let's just open that directly with the sheets. Have a clearer look. And yeah, that looks pretty good. So we have the score here. And we do have also directly a hook. That's good. Now, what I actually do want to have is a reasoning on the scoring. Can you include your reasoning on the scoring CSV? So I have background information on this. Good, so let's do this. So we are another 1 minute and 20 seconds in, and Claude has just told us that the CSV has been updated, and that does make sense. So let's look at that new CSV file directly. Okay, so we have here reasonings and key data points. So we have a better understanding actually now what is going on and what the key information parameters were that led to the ICP score. We also do have a hook Didn't specifically give that instruction, but definitely pretty useful when we want to start our outbound. So now we can go ahead with these two companies which have been scored appropriately and look for the leads. Go back to the sales intelligence tool, pull the leads, and then let's see how we can work with this hook to start the outbound. So this is actually now how we arrived at that list here at our initial output. And this is exactly an example on how we would do the lead scoring. Now, obviously, what you saw or what we saw is when we think about the different capabilities, Claude could do a pretty good web research. We do have other tools at our disposal, things like EXA, which we can cover in another session. Do let me know in the comments if you want to see that. But we obviously can now augment Claude's inherent capabilities to make it a little bit more appropriate to our specific use case. And we can let Claude make analysis based on instructions we gave it to. So obviously, when we talk about account intel or market sizing, it's just that it probably needs some additional instructions on based on what criteria we want to do the market sizing, like what's the background, what are we looking for, and we can save these instructions with Claude in the skill files. And basically how we create the skill files is always using Claude itself, right? So there is no manual work here to do, no magic. I just told the LLM, hey, this is our ICP. Please make sure you have the skills and capabilities to do a scoring later on, and it created that. So you can do that. We do need a folder structure, just like we humans need a folder structure. So we're going to work on our same SharePoint. Important is these things will have something like an index file and an agent file. Optimize that stuff for agents, not for yourself. If the agent is optimized, you are leveraged. So guys, when you think back to our mental model and our examples, we had these other criteria. We've just covered one example from research, and we do have stuff like repurposing content or coding workflows. Now, repurposing content is another really, really key area where you can find a lot of use cases which are applicable to AI. Just always think about, again, just as we did in the lead scoring, what's my input? What's the skills or knowledge and therefore instructions and knowledge information points I need the LLM to apply to that raw input to get a certain output? How should my output look like? So again, there are a lot of examples in things like marketing where you, for instance, need to do a blog post or a LinkedIn post about a new feature you have just released or about a value proposition you want to talk about. And this has been surfaced a lot in customer calls, on sales calls, on internal calls where your customer unit is talking about that, how clients are really jumping on that. So you want to talk about that. So again, if you think about what we just did with the scoring, where we had the account list, we had the scoring criteria based on the ICP, and we had the scored accounts. We had the input, which was our account list. So for the example, for instance, what I just said, making a blog post based on what a customer told us about how great the product is in a customer call. We have the input here, right? Our customer call. We have a skill or knowledge, which was in the scoring, in the lead scoring, our scoring criteria. Now, when I want to do a blog post about something which was said in a call, in that input, what do I need? I need voice guidelines on how I specifically talk in this blog post. I need maybe knowledge on keywords back from a CEO analysis. And I need, for instance, design guidelines on how my website should look like. So these are then, again, different skills and knowledge points which I need to store. And again, my output is maybe an HTML document, an HTML file, which I then can use to push it to my website. So again, back to our folder structure, think about these fundamentals. Same as we will have in reality a lead scoring folder, for instance, within our sales folder for the sales department, we will have a content marketing or content folder, for instance, in our marketing folder. Same same as we have that, I have now done that for the demo. So I have done a folder for the lead scoring, and same as I've done for the lead scoring, I have done for content repurposing. So we have here again, as we had before, our raw data. We have certain skills, we have knowledge points, and we have output. Always think back to that. So in our example, on turning something which was said in a customer call, turning that into an output, I have my customer call as an input, just as I had just back a few minutes with my account list. And this customer call is stored in raw data. I have here a customer call, customer with the name Sophie Keller. I was talking to her, head of sustainability. Obviously, all this is made up. This is created with AI, but I have the information about what the customer talks about. I do have now, I know I need to have skills and knowledge. So I need to have, for instance, design guidelines for my website. And I need to have, for instance, also my LinkedIn voice. Let's say, sorry, my voice. It could be, for instance, LinkedIn. However I talk on my website. And I want to have, for instance, knowledge about keywords. The output I want to have is an HTML document. This is the actual blog post. So I have saved these design guidelines, again, here in Docs, just as we had this in the sales folder. And I have saved certain skills on how to repurpose that call, where there are certain criteria defined. And I have now, out of this, created an output, which is a blog post based on what the customer talked about. So here I do have my blog post, and I've just created this basically saying, look, you have a customer call in the folder, you have it saved there, you have a couple of guidelines, which I gave you, you have a couple of guidelines and capabilities, skills, you have a couple of skills to know what to look for, what keywords we use, what our customers really like to hear, what flies. And you have to take that content and turn it into an HTML file, which contains the text and the different guidelines, which is ready to push to our website. And this is now the output. So here I have the full article exactly in the design I wanted it to have, which corresponds to the design I have here on that slide. Again, a very simple example, and we rushed through this, but I do want to illustrate what is possible with the simple concepts of have in mind what you can use it for, research, repurposing content, coding workflows, and do have in mind that a lot of the stuff you're doing is taking an input, applying certain rules, and creating an output. And this is where AI is super useful for if you adhere to these fundamentals. So we now have a mental model to identify the type of tasks which are interesting to tackle with AI. We do have the fundamentals in place, kind of the building blocks on how this entire thing works. And we know that a lot comes down to this framework of input, apply skills and knowledge. So give the LLM guidelines, instructions to navigate and to steer it towards a certain result in order to get another output. How do we now execute this at scale? And for this is really the key to kind of insert into the folder structure or your database on a regular basis. And what this means is what you want to do is you want to kind of build this intelligence layer, right? Because if you think about what do I actually need when we looked about the examples which we just had, we need things like our account list. We need things like customer calls, feature release specs. We need information about our ICPs, all that kind of stuff. So we need to build that intelligence layer, that kind of layer of input, as we need it here, and we need to capture the skills and knowledge in order to get the output. And this is what we do in the intelligence layer. So your customer intelligence, and we can think about it as this intelligence layer having three components: customer intelligence, performance intelligence, and company knowledge. So customer intelligence, what is that? What do you need to have in there? You need to have your call transcripts, definitely, because you want to have all the information that the clients say in the calls. You want to have something like support tickets. Why? They contain a ton of feedback, a ton of things which have to be changed in the platform, bugs, all that kind of stuff. You want to contain in there general feedback items, whatever your feedback channels are, internally, for instance, from customer-facing teams to product or from your customers directly. Include that in there. So that's kind of your customer intelligence, right? You can, on top of that, obviously, execute these external research tasks, monitor the market, whatever, include that in there. What you also do want to have, if you think, for instance, important things you need to do in marketing, right? When you test certain messages, when you test the performance of that output, of that blog post, of that LinkedIn post, you do want to have a feedback loop of your performance analytics feeding back in. So there is certainly a layer only taking care of that performance, and it's basically your social analytics. So there could be other stuff about specific conversion rates in whatever sales motion you have, conversion rates on events or webinars or outbound emails, whatever. But you do want that in there. So whatever you do, whatever actions or output you produce, you want to have these feedback loops in your intelligence layer. But these feedback loops are certainly different to this raw input from your customers. And what you also want to have in your intelligence layer is basically these things here, right? Skills and knowledge. So what are these things which we need to have? We need to have information on our ICP. We need to have information on our mission. We need to have information on our vision. We need to have information on deals lost. We need to have information on messaging, on voices, on brand guidelines. All this is something we need to have in there. Because whatever we do, we're gonna take this raw input and we're gonna take the knowledge on what worked well, what didn't from here, and we're gonna transform it into an output. And in order for the AI to do the transformation, we need that stuff. And this stuff is basically captured in these skills. It's the instructions for an LLM. So we use the LLM to apply the skills based on these information points. So we don't have to feed it. It feeds it automatically to arrive at an output. And that's really it. These are the building blocks to get started, to execute your first use cases, and to think about, once you've mastered that, how you can scale that and what baseline you need in order to scale that. So I hope that helped.